Hey, what's going on, you guys? So I thought it would be a good idea to give the video a really
Hey, what's going on, you guys?
ridiculous title. You know, a lot of times scientists are really concerned. Like, yeah, you've seen those videos of Richard Dawkins stalking um, Deepak Chopra and challenging him on the validity of using the word quantum when it comes to consciousness, right? You can't use that word. So I'm just expanding that a little bit here to call it the thermodynamics of consciousness, which you clearly can't use with consciousness either. But why not? And it's a bit highfalutin and overstated because I'm not getting that deep into it. And it'll probably be a short video because it's just a mild insight. Mild insight. I'm just trying to think what the last video was I did here. Might just be good to check that quickly just to see where I'm at vis-a-vis you guys. I've done a few videos in the member section, sort of talking about a few things. And if you follow the channel at all, then oh yeah, the last video I did was with Krister then, right? Yep. And if you follow the community section at all, I often post there like various things that are going on, in life and
Yes.
that
And
kind of
how
thing,
you?
but yeah. Yeah, so one thing I think I did talk about this on the channel. Oh, sorry, I'm just sort of going back and forth here. I did a members video about this, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to get straight what I've spoken to people about so that I'm not like presuming that you understand certain things which I may not have mentioned publicly previously on the channel. Yeah, okay. So I did talk about this, but I talked about it on the other section. Anyway, one of the things that's happened is I haven't really been meditating much because of the rasa, because it's like it's kind of with you all the time, and sometimes it's a bit intense. The rasa, there's well, a very intense process that can be. And I don't know if you can hear that wonderful sound there, but that sound is the sound of my telephone. Hold on a second. I'm just going to turn that off. There you go. And we're back. So, yeah. So what I was saying is, what was I trying to say? Yeah. So there's been like some pretty intense experiences emerging from the rasa, and I haven't been meditating much as a result of that because the whole experience has been intense. And there are some like amazingly wonderful experiences which have been happening. I mentioned one of those in the member section the other day. Like just crazy stuff. Like so, the other day I went to bed and I thought I would meditate, and within 10 seconds there was like an angelic evocation in the bedroom, like beyond belief kind of event. Um, so that was amazing. But on the other hand, there's been some like really intense. It's a strong word to use, but like depersonalization events, like which is kind of like the non-duality has the appearance or has the feeling of fracturing your identity, um, which can be a little disconcerting. Is the fun thing is I've had this before, like years ago, like back in the day before any of the energy initiations, but in that epoch, it was a more difficult thing to deal with. But still, that was pretty astonishing fragmentation of the personality, which is directly related to the rasa. And and in addition, there's been yeah, and like the third eye is wide open. Uh, well, in some in some senses, it's wide open. In other senses, maybe not quite so. Um, yeah. Anyway, this video is called the thermodynamics of consciousness. So let me just get to the point here. Is that the whole idea of thermodynamics of consciousness is this, and this is like if you look up what are the laws of thermodynamics. The laws of thermodynamics define a group of physical qualities such as temperature, energy, and entropy that characterize thermodynamic systems in thermodynamic equilibrium. Um, so I mean, you can look into this, and probably you could read the whole definition here, and it would be a fascinating, if not completely inaccurate, representation of what I'm about to discuss. But there are similarities. Um, the main thing, I guess, the main idea, which put the word, it's the it's the idea of friction, the idea of friction in consciousness. Um, It's funny, like if you put this into like physical terms, this is what you could say is like if you were to touch your hand, for example. Let me just go somewhere where I can actually see what I'm doing here. If you're going to touch your hand, for example, just like touch it, there's a certain physical energy associated with this, right? And if you focus on the actual touch sensation, there are at least 2 points of sensory input, right? One's this, and the other is the hand, right? And you can break it down further into like specific points or elevated areas, right? And so there's a sensation of that, and there's also like a sensation of heat, right? There's a sensation of heat between the arm. Like my hand here is kind of warm. Um, so that's one aspect of this. Um, and that's just like that's something to think about. And then the other aspect of this, of course, is if like right now this is just like a sort of random touch that I'm doing on my hand, right? It's not really got much significance other than hey, I'm touching my hand at the moment, right? And that's all I'm really doing. Hey, I'm touching my hand. But there are different ways of touching the hand, right? So, for example, sometimes my cat will come up in the middle of the night and it will put its face up against my arm, right? And meow, right? And it's like it's got this, it's got like it has a feeling to it, right? And the it's interesting because one way you could think of that is you could think of that feeling as being like sort of a loving touch, but it actually might just be hungry. But there's like an interpretive distinction there, like what is the significance of that actually, right? Between that feeling. But you know, if you interpret it as a loving touch, then that changes the interpretation of the touch, right? So right now it's just I'm just touching my arm, right? If you're with your lover, that might take on other concepts on top of that, right? Um, I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy. Like, where do those other concepts come from? Like, what does that even mean, right? I mean, because like all we're doing is touching the arm. Where do the other ideas come from, right? Those are like they're like energetic or something, right? Um, if somebody dies, you might be like, I'm so sorry, like or if somebody's crying, you might touch their head or like So sorry. And it's the same actual touch, but it's got this different metadata is the word I used recently, right? There's like a sort of metadata aspect of that. There's like a different sort of overlay, which isn't which isn't what's the word I'm looking for? Isn't obvious. It's not the word, but it's not obvious, right? It's sort of separated. That's in the physical world. But you might, like, for example, if you're crying and somebody comes up to you and touches you like this, you know, you might actually like feel comforted by that feeling, right? Like, oh, and it might the actual touch and the intention of the touch might actually provoke a sort of a feeling. When I was a kid, we had like a housekeeper, and I remember we used to sit in front of the window just before she'd leave work. She would be sitting out waiting for the bus to come or something, and we'd be sitting out in the living room looking out the window, and she would talk very slowly, and it had like an ASMR vibe to it when she spoke. She would speak very slowly, but it would have this sort of like ASMR kind of vibe, and it would I would get this like vibe down the back of my neck where it just felt it was just like oh man, it was just like this vibration, like I didn't want her to stop talking. And you can get that if you're sensitive to ASMR, you can get this off of ASMR videos, right? Like you get that vibe where it's like there's like there's a vibrational metadata component to the physical action of whatever it is. Um, so the reason I'm mentioning this is because I mean there's something interesting about it. So there's a couple of things. One, you're touching the hand, and there's like an intention or a metadata emotional connection there. But then at the same time, there's also just like a physical aspect, and the physical aspect is actually there's actually heat generated, right? There's actually like friction and heat generated from the physical aspect. So that's actually the physical aspect of what's going on, right? Physical aspect of what's going on. Now I just posted something in the community, and I somebody mentioned this, and I was like, it was kind of quite an interesting take on it. Like when the third eye opens, like I had a big third eye opening a couple of weeks ago, and it just seemed like I became really visionary. Like I could see Shiva and Shakti in all reality, and like I could just see divinity everywhere. And that was like 24 hours of this, and it's like wow, that's the opening of the third eye. But what this person was suggesting, they were suggesting that the third like when the third eye opens it doesn't actually create visions. What it does is removes the projections it removes the projections of the mind. So what we actually are used to seeing is the projection of mind, or in other words visions. The visionary state of the mind is what we are accustomed to working with in our regular life. So what that means is we're actually working in a visionary state now. So when you open your third eye, you're not moving into a visionary state. You're actually removing the visions, right? To see what reality is. And that's kind of ties into what awakening is. Awakening is about tuning into what actual reality is, right? Rather than what the projection of mind is. And it sounds like, it's funny because it sounds like that wouldn't be that big a deal, but it completely changes reality completely. It's unbelievable. So one of the things about this is that when you remove those boundaries, uh, the whole of reality becomes like very immediate and intense, I guess. Just like everything just becomes it's yeah, everything just becomes more focused and real. Um, this is not actually, I'm not at the thermodynamics of consciousness yet. I'm getting to this point here. I'm just sort of working there slowly. Sorry, I tend to do this in my videos. But as a result of that, that's one of the reasons I haven't been meditating much, is because it's not really necessary, because just regular life is kind of like, what is going on? Like what is it's sort of like looking at things again for the first time, and it's like I know what this is, and then you're like, do I? Do I know what this thing is? Anyway, for some crazy reason, I decided to meditate this morning, and in the same way that the hand touching the arm creates friction, right? I mean, it's an obvious thing to observe. There's friction and heat generated by touching the hand to the arm, right? So we've got a physical object and a physical object, and they have an output, and the output's actually energetic, right? The energetic output is like it's like heat, right? And there's also a touch aspect, and I guess that translates into some kind of like a potential mind overlay or psychic output, for lack of a better word. Um, so when you meditate and you meditate on an idea or a mantra or whatever, or even on the presence itself, right? Or on divinity or on the breath. Um, the actual impact of that experience, like when you are using your mind, because your mind is doing the meditation, and your mind is meditating on an idea. I'm saying that is analogical to the hand touching the arm. So when the mind meditates on a mantra or an idea or on divinity or on energy or on presence or on a flower or on anything you want, there's there's it's a literal analogy of the hand touching the arm. And what happens is much in the way that the hand touching the arm outputs produces outputs, heat, um, feelings, uh, energy, psychic outputs. There are similar outputs created by consciousness when it observes itself. So if you're using your mind to observe a mantra, for example, or you're reciting the mantra, and like what happens is the recitation of the mantra, and this is one of this crazy. There's the big dynamic in meditation and in conscious generally seems to be um, about the subject and object, right? That's like a big deal. Like, what is the subject and what is the object? Now, non-duality tells us that there is not the subject and the object are actually just they're just it's just awareness posing as a subject and object, right? They actually don't exist. It's just awareness. But well, ultimately, ultimately that's true. Although Shakti is performing this play, this dance for Shiva to perceive. So when your mind, because the thing is, what happens is when you recite a mantra. Because I remember when I started reciting mantras, I'd be like, okay, I subject, I'm going to recite a mantra object, right? And I just be like, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, right? And you'd be saying it, and you'd be thinking things to yourself like, is it working yet, or does this work, or what is this? And you're kind of missing the point at that stage because what it really is it's awareness itself reciting the mantra and observing it. Because what's happening actually, you're not actually observing it consciously yet. So there's almost like an is that the word involution? I'm going to use the word involution without knowing what it means. What does that mean? It means oh man, a function, transformation, or operator that's equal to its inverse, which gives identity when applied to itself. Well, that's the mathematical definition, and I'm not really sure what that means, but it sounds good. it's like an involution of the of awareness becomes like self-referential. But in the moment when the subject, when the imaginary subject perceives the imaginary object and the mind caresses the object. So like here's the thing is if you're doing like for example Om Mani Padme Hum, what does that mean? Now there's a specific meaning you can look up in the dictionary, like it's got a specific like some people interpret it as the jewel in the lotus, something like that, right? And that's something you could think about, right? But you could also think about it literally like as like sounds. Om Mani Padme Hum. What does that mean, right? Or you can think of it actually as like it's like a philosophical object which is hanging in space, right? There's it's like it's just it's a placeholder for an idea which exists in consciousness. And so when we focus our mind on that or any other mantra, but let's say Om Mani Padme Hum, you can you can literally, and I'm using my fingers here to try and describe what my subjective consciousness is doing to the objective mantra, that it's almost a spatial observation of this space which is held by the mantra in space. And so it's almost like caressing the space which in which is located the mantra, if you follow my drift. So there's a bunch of ways, there's a bunch of access points to the knowledge. It's not knowledge, it's the wrong word. To the consciousness of what that mantra is. And so this is one of the things is like, where do we locate, where do we locate the mantra? So at first you might like I was saying, you might locate it like, okay, I'm going to say Om Mani Padme Hum, and you're locating it like in sound, right? Or in a story you've heard about it, like okay, it means the the jewel in the lotus, and you might be thinking about that, right? So that's one way of thinking about it, which is a valid way of thinking about it also, right? It's not an invalid way of thinking about it. And you can think about it as sound. You can also, another way of thinking about it too, is you can actually visualize the actual letters and allow your sort of mind's eye to trace around the outside of the letters. And that in some ways is a good way of doing it, because if you do that, that's not actually the space of consciousness yet, but it's analogous to this, to doing it in the space of consciousness, right? But here's the interesting part. This is the third. This is where I get my highfalutin title from. The thermodynamics of consciousness is that when you allow your mind to gracefully um, perambulate, I think I used that word last time. Perambulate around the conscious structure of the mantra, much like the hand touching the arm, friction is created. But of course, there is no friction in consciousness, right? There are no physical um, properties, right? So it's clearly just a metaphorical idea. But what happens is the the movement of objective awareness over, or sorry, subjective awareness over the object creates something analogous to friction. And that friction can take various forms depending on, I'm not sure what it depends on, probably the sort of what's the word? I won't use the word purity, but maybe purity, balance, or imbalance of the observer. And what it does is it creates sort of cascading waves of sort of meta conscious material which emerge from as the two surfaces, because they seem to operate like surfaces, and so when these two surfaces collide, there's like a there's just I'm feeling it right now. There's like a it's like a beautiful vibrational contact. It's just it's what happens is when you become aware of consciousness at this level, just the ability to perceive it is incredibly pleasurable because it's like what's it like? Um, I guess it's the difference between eating at McDonald's or eating at at a Michelin starred restaurant, right? It's like you just it's this it's it's not even purity. It's just this like delicacy, this exquisite appreciation of the delicacy of these forms. So it's funny because I'm clearly talking about forms. So we're not talking about non-dual awareness here because non-dual awareness is like the collapse of all forms. But there's this space in which the experience of pre-physical form is so exquisite. It's so filigreed and delicate and also vibrationally attuned. You get this sort of like vibrational output in the same way that the hand touching the arm creates a vibrational output. It creates this it creates a vibrational output, but the vibrational outputs are not physical. So they can be beautiful or they can have emotional content or they can have like other subconscious outputs which we might think of as emotional in some ways, loving. So that was what happened today. I was thinking about I can't remember what I was thinking about, but I was thinking about I was allowing my consciousness to move. Oh yeah, I remember what I was thinking about. I was allowing my consciousness to move over a certain surface, and there was this like uh, wake. It's almost like the wake. Or it's almost like it's like the wake out of the back of a boat. So as your consciousness moves over the object, there's like a turbulent wake behind it, and that wake which was being released was like it was just like this pure loving energy, just like and just oh my god, just totally like mind bending vibration, which I'm feeling a little bit of it right now, just like right there. Oh my god, it feels so good. It's this is what happens is it feels so good you don't want to stop contemplating it because you're like, does that go on forever? Does that vibrational wake continue forever? And if you just move, it's funny because it's like an infinitesimal movement. It's like once you discover the surface of the surface of what? Of beauty, of attraction, of desire, of and it's none of those things. It's like just what it is. It's the it's the last. Who knows if it's the last really, but it's like the last dimensional form before formlessness, and as a result, it's got sort of magnetic attraction, which is just it's imperceivably or no, it's perceivably imperceivably. It's just incredibly beautiful resonance. Not that I want to make an esoteric video or anything, right? Um, but you know, I think, I mean, this gets pretty esoteric maybe, but I mean, my point is this: is that you know, I was talking to my brother the other day, and I was trying to, all I do is talk about consciousness clearly, even if I'm not on YouTube. If you're unlucky enough to meet me on the street, somehow we're going to end up talking about consciousness. It's just what's going to happen, you know, because it's all I think about. But anyway, I was talking to my brother the other day, and he's been watching a lot of Ken. He's really into Ken Wheeler, who's a very wise and smart Buddhist guy who can speak ancient Pali and Sanskrit and like all kinds of stuff. You know, he's like, and he's got an amazing YouTube channel which is on the community page, which on my channel. I've been watching some stuff, but like I was talking to my brother about a few things about consciousness and uh, and the elements. And one of the things that Ken Wheeler's got on his website, on his YouTube channel, he's got a whole scientific analysis of the harmonic frequencies of water and how those frequencies actually basically become this, like he defines it as like water is like a perfect reality couldn't exist without physical water. And he explains it sort of philosophically and scientifically because he's a genius. Ken Wheeler's a genius, right? He can synthesize so much stuff, and he's an expert in all the Buddhist texts. Like probably nobody's as knowledgeable as he is, even in Tibet. I mean, he's one of these guys with like a photographic memory. He just knows everything. Anyway, so we were talking about this, and I was saying to my brother, I'm like, it seems like he's made an error here, which I don't have the same kind of mind as Ken Wheeler, but but it almost is like an error because he was locating consciousness, or he seemed to be locating it in the physical world, right? And using it's like he was using a lot of empirical data to sort of justify this idea of water being having a certain position in the universe, which is really interesting, but it just doesn't seem right to me because water, as you know, is the it's part of the elemental structure of consciousness, right? It's not like the water elements get nothing to do with physical water. Now, you might be able to extrapolate scientific theories and justify them in all kinds of ways with physical water, and it might be an amazing thing, but it's nowhere near as amazing as the water element in pure consciousness. It's just like it's way boring, right? And if you're going to investigate the water element in pure consciousness, you don't need any mathematical acumen. You just need the ability to focus and uh, and it was funny because like as we were talking, because my brother's, he doesn't meditate really at all, and he doesn't really, but he's really smart, Anyway, as we were talking, there was one part where we were talking, and I noticed when I mentioned we were talking about an idea. I can't remember what the idea was. We're talking about a specific idea, and I said to him like, yeah, but where where is this idea located? What's the spatial location? And I could see it in his eyes. It was like a new idea. It lit up. Like, oh, like it was like this idea of like where to locate. Where is consciousness? Where is the idea located? And like as I was saying with Omni-Padme, there's a bunch of ways you can interpret this, right? You can interpret it as the sound. You can interpret it as the letters. You can interpret it as the translation, right? Or you can interpret it as a space and consciousness. Now, when I started like meditating, I was just meditating on like this more simple physical ideas. But because I was lucky enough to be able to meditate for longer periods of time, what happens? There's almost like a gravity which happens, and like as you're focusing and focusing on on, for example, the definition of what Om Mani Padme Hum means, like it almost like collapses in on itself, and then you start perceiving it as the other structure, which maybe is the underlying conscious entity underneath that. It becomes more refined. It becomes a more refined structure. So you can move your consciousness around the sound. Like you can listen to sound, and sound can become the doorway into higher awareness, right? So if you're just listening, and it's funny because we take it so much for granted. We're so accustomed to speaking that we take it for granted about the exquisite articulation of syllables and the actual movement of the tongue against the teeth and the top of the mouth and the sort of what they call it, like the fricative sound of the consonants coming out, right? Or the soft sounds. And so like these even on the simple level, analyzing the mantra as a sound form, like if you really focus on it, it's an incredibly rich area of meditational exploration, right? If you actually are doing it. And then of course, if you don't say it out loud and then you just say it in your mind, that becomes really interesting too, because now where did all the syllables go? right? I mean that, and then what you can do is you can focus on, okay, I still appear to be saying this, but there's no syllables, but I can hear the syllables in my head. So that space between the syllable, between the physical syllable and the mental syllable, that space between those two things, that becomes a focus of meditation, right? So you would change your meditation into the space between them, right? And then you'd focus on this and that. When consciousness sees you appreciating thermodynamics of consciousness, right? Just so I can repeat that phrase again. When it sees you appreciating this, like, what is that? What is that? Now, these are the things you might see discussed in some kind of linguistic books, right? But the problem with linguistic books is they start trying to focus on the physical world and they get caught up with history and the movement of the tongue. And all these things are really good, but they don't lead you to consciousness, right? They might, but the problem is the physical world is so detailed, it will lead you away from consciousness, right? In a fascinatingly interesting way, it will lead you away from consciousness so that you can focus on the physical world. It's it's crazy. It's designed to lead you away from perception of consciousness itself. The upside of this, of course, is that if you start being able to perceive this stuff, it's this wonderful feedback. This amazing feedback into the self, wherever the self is, right? So all of these things become metaphorical and analogical for consciousness, right? And see, the same way that the object and the subject are structured around the observer of the mantra and the mantra itself. I mean, you can extrapolate from that and from the observer and to the self. I mean, what's the difference, right? It's like one loop outside of that one, right? It's just a slight abstraction. So you're never going to notice this if you don't meditate extensively, because it takes. I mean, you might luck into it. I would never have noticed it. You know, I would never have noticed it if I hadn't meditated extensively, um, in a focused way. Now, of course, there are potentially negative outputs of this. That tends to not happen if you've got a good meditational practice. But clearly, 5 years ago, I was having these sometimes negative evocations occurring, and that was because the cadence of my observation was unbalanced, right? So you have to be quite careful about how you position the imaginary self, right? So the imaginary self, while imaginary, still has real. It's not imaginary. It's real. It's real in the context of consciousness. It has reality. So whatever you bring to the structure, even though the self is some kind of illusion, it's not really an illusion. It has, and like your as long as your awareness is focused in the what's that phrase, in the reality tunnel of yourself, like your in your ego personality, then the tenets of that personality will manifest in the meditational object. But clearly, part of this is to sort of extrapolate out. So the meditational process seems to be to focus on the object, and then like it either collapses in itself or it extrapolates out. It does some. There's like a sort of spatial movement there, where it moves into a more abstract or more refined perception of what the object. Yeah, it's almost like the object becomes more refined and the self becomes more abstract. Is that what it is? There's something like that going on. right? And so there's a refination, right? Now, of course, if you do rasa, and a couple more people did it this week too, is the rasa seems to because like a lot of the stuff clearly is pretty esoteric, right? Um, but if you do the rasa, it seems to be able to like allow people to perceive this stuff uh, often in a subtle way, or start subtly. So you don't get the subtle appreciation of these ideas right off, but you get the wow, you get it sort of gives you a head start in some of these practices. It gives you a little bit of a head start on this, is what I'm saying. So you'll be able to appreciate what I'm talking about here. So the wow, wow, I'm just like vibrating here. It's just like what consciousness loves is consciousness loves to observe it. And when you observe it, it goes into a state of vibration. And that vibration it's unbelievably pleasurable just to feel that vibration. And it's oh my God, it's unbelievable. Um, the perception of consciousness. And at the moment, I'm pretty much talking about consciousness in its well, we're perceiving Shakti. It really is. It's like a prism. You can like approach it from any of the facets of the prism, and wow, it's so illuminated and perfect. Um, yeah, I seem to have run out of steam here. I think my main point is that the that here it's like a little practice. Touch your arm, perceive as much as you can the different interactions that occur between the hand and the arm, or with any object. Doesn't matter what any object, right? Um, or maybe that's a good way of doing it. Actually, is like different objects, like a steel object, metal object, a plastic object, and like feel the differences, right? What are the distinct qualities of between these different physical items? And then as you move into a meditational state, try and perceive different qualities of the items, and they're way more subtle. This is what's really amazing about it. The qualities of consciousness are so. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's such a privilege to be able to see this stuff. I mean, it's just like the refinement and perfection. It's like the perfection of consciousness. Are you kidding me? It's perfect, right? Nobody would believe this. You know, it's so funny. People are like working to buy Louis Vuitton handbags. They have no idea what's possible. Like, I mean, it's like garbage compared to what consciousness is. I mean, the perfection of consciousness is so unbelievably refined and perfect, right? Um, and people are working for so-called luxury goods, and they get no idea like where this emerges from. Hmm. But it's a good practice. Try and perceive the implicit qualities of consciousness, but also try and take it as like a principle that there might be thermodynamic effects, for lack of a better word, between the subject and object. As you move your awareness through consciousness, there are effects there are effects from the movement of consciousness. Try and observe them. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think I am. Maybe it's just something particular with me. I've never heard anybody talking about this stuff before, right? Haven't heard Ken Wheeler talking about this stuff. Maybe he knows more than me. Maybe I've seen more things than he has, right? Maybe he's never done shitloads of ayahuasca and blown his brains open. I don't know. Help me out here, people. Try it out and see what happens. See if you can feel this vibration. I mean, look at me. I look like a fool here. Like, oh my God, my third eye, my third eye is vibrating. It feels so good. I'm like in a semi-orgasmic state here, talking on YouTube, just with my third eye, right? When I started this video, I knew I didn't have that much to talk to, but it's like the vibration, that's the sensation is so phenomenal. It has to be discussed, even if it sounds esoteric, right? I should actually dumb down the title. Thermodynamics of consciousness will scare people away, right? Although I've been talking about it for the whole video. But I should start trying to do this in a much simpler way, right? Oh, and that's something else I wanted to talk about briefly too, actually, is the what is it about people who are awakened? Like if it's Adyashanti or Rupert Spiro or any of the multitude of these awakened guys. And awakening is incredibly simple, right? It's like enlightenment, as it's discussed commonly, is a simple process. It's and like a lot of these guys, they don't really take Kundalini seriously, right? They don't take Kundalini seriously, but they take awakening very seriously. And like Kundalini is thought of as the arising and passing away, and it's just something you get through so you can like live in this like non-dual perspective. And so it seems like that's just the state of affairs. That's it. But I think that's a massive oversimplification. I mean, there is, listen, that vibe is there. Like you can move into the state of consciousness, and that's what it is. And it's really comforting, right? But Kundalini exists, it creates everything around us. It's unlimited power in the same way that enlightenment, which is really awakening to Shiva, Kundalini awakening is awakening to Shakti. Enlightenment is awakening to Shiva. And Krista would say real enlightenment is awakening to nothingness, right? But it starts off in like the Shiva zone. That's how that's how you perceive it. Like when it descends into your crown chakra. It's but it's there's clearly nothingness behind it. But yeah, so I mean, what is it with all these guys who like they don't take Kundalini seriously? Maybe it's because like this world doesn't exist, but the tantrics would say it does exist. It's an expression of divinity, and its evolution, unfoldment, and everything is basically managed by Kundalini completely. Except except the conscious awareness is there too. It's like they have to be together, right? So there is no Shiva and Shakti, but they're there. They're there, separate, but not even existing. They also don't exist. They have Shiva and Shakti have the same problem as your ego. Your ego also think it exists, and it doesn't exist. And Shiva and Shakti are the same thing. They don't exist, yet they find themselves in this divine dance between the creation of objects and the perception of objects, right? Wow. Okay, I think I'm done, right? I'm just sitting here talking to myself. Anyway, that's it for just now. Yeah, talk to you guys later. Peace out. I don't really want to stop. I want to keep talking because it feels so good, but like, whatever.